So I would like to state that there's nothing like a great big cup of tea in the morning to start some machining. Um, that way, the spiders that are occupying my shop have a place to have a bath when I'm inadvertently not looking at the cup. I'd also like to say that no spider was intentionally hurt during the making of this video, so I hope I'm not getting reported for this. The first thing I want to say is I picked up this bar of material to make these tool holders for quick release posts for my lathe. My idea here, after getting all the measurements, was to cut multiple holders out of the one piece of metal, and I wanted to get as much of the milling work done while still one piece of metal before cutting it up. Also, the reason I was decided to do this is I wanted to make the depth of the tools that the holders could hold a little bit deeper. Um, and so each one of them was about an eighth of an inch deeper, so they can hold a three-quarter inch tool in them. The only truly important measurement on this is the one I'm taking right now on the dovetail. Um, Too deep or too wide, and the tool post will just not hold them. So after getting everything drawn up towards the bottom there, you can see the measurements I have for the current and the future tool holders that I want to create out of this bar of metal. Hindsight, I will not ever be running such a big piece of metal in my milling machine again. I did run into some pretty big problems towards the end. The start here with the shell mill, no problem whatsoever. The thing cut great. I did leave a little bit of grooving on the one end where it was not actually clearing the bar, and the little machinist jacks on both sides were absolutely essential. What I did find was that the vise has a little bit of problems, and I did watch a few videos on people ripping their vise apart. And you know, if you're buying a very very cheap vise, you're going to have some issues, and you're going to have to deal with those issues. And I've come to that realization that I can spend a lot of money on really good quality tools, or I can buy cheaper tools and have to rework them to some degree to make them at least functional in the shop. So back to this. A couple things this vice is not doing. When you tighten down the vice, and it's taking a hammer and tapping down on the material onto the parallels. For some reason, once you tighten it, the material's lifting up. And I even put a set of 1, 2, 3 blocks in there, and the same thing happened. The material lifted up. So it's going to be a matter of going in there, doing some grinding, maybe possibly taking part of that vice into a fully operational machine shop, and having it running on one of their surface grinders to get everything flat and square. But I think for the most part, I'll tear it apart in my shop and see what I can do. And of course, I do plan on buying another vise to use while I'm tearing this one apart, because I don't see this being like a 1 or 2 hour operation here. I think it's going to be rather extensive in making this thing work properly, making sure everything's square. When everything was said and done on these, the finish was pretty good. You can see if you look way over on the far end of this piece, there's a little ring there where the actual cutters, the index cutters, were not clearing the bar. And if I ever start running larger pieces like this again, I'll make sure that there's clearance on both sides of the pieces, or both sides of the piece with the tool in, so it doesn't do that. The biggest problem I did have with this come when I was actually using a smaller end mill to cut the groove out of the center, and it definitely was not happy about not being able to clear that piece of material. Um, and in fact, it ran into quite a few problems. Hindsight on this part too, there was absolutely no reason whatsoever to dye this whole thing blue. I could have just done the one corner where I was going to come in with the cutters and mark that. And being that I was in the vise and parallel to the milling machine, it would have just, followed the same mark all the way through. When I did mark this, just use a square, set it out to where the line is, and just scribed it. And then the idea was to go on the other side and do the same thing. But what I did find is it was a little bit awkward for me to go on the other side. And at the end here, you got to turn it around, or else your square's just going to fall off the material before you get that line in. So for the other side, I did actually set it up to put the square on the other side and draw the line on there. But it didn't take long to figure out that that was not going to work for me. So the next thing I had to do is just do a little bit of math. So I made that line possible to put on from the bottom side of it, like 1.41 compared to the 0.8, whatever it was. And that allowed me to cut the line from the bottom the same way I cut the first line, and had full control of the tools and they weren't slipping. Again, there was no real need to do this whole line, and when it went in the milling machine, I did put an indicator on it, and it was indicating that it was crawling up. The solution with this for this was just to loosen that vise off a bit and just change those jacks ever so slightly until I got it running true throughout the whole piece. This didn't last long. I think I made like maybe 2, 3 cuts down this material before it didn't really like it. It was going a little longer, and bottoming out and powering out, and not caring too much for doing this at all. And of course, you see all the smoke from the heat there. I do have a complete setup on this for a mister. Um, but for some reason I decided didn't really need a mister there. At this point here, I have cut all the material. You can see that the bottom of this has been cut out, and now I'm getting ready to put the dovetails into it. For these dovetails, I did get to buy some new tools. I did have some dovetails cutters for 45 degrees, but I did need the 60-degree cutters for this particular project. And the key with this, as I found out, if you just go a little too far on cutting these dovetails, they just will not work at all. They're very precise measurement here. It has to, match up with the holder pretty much absolutely perfect to get the tension on it you need. Um, Again, though, for the depth of that, I just was using the calipers. I didn't see any reason to dig out the depth micrometers at this stage. When I was cutting these, I would cut one pass right down to the depth I wanted. Then I'll take the next piece and cut one pass right down to the depth I wanted, and do all 5 pieces. Then start with the first one again, move the vise so it's cut next to it. And that way it was all indexed throughout the project, and I didn't, have to keep changing information on my DRO. The pieces were flush to the one side of the vise, and it worked out really good. And it gave really good finish, and I was well within spec on cutting this. Where it kind of went out of spec is when I was actually using the dovetail cutters, and that's really where I started to understand the difference between climbing and conventional milling. When I'd go one way down the piece of metal, it would cut really fine, but coming back the other way, and tighten up just a little bit more to make a bit of a cut in it. And the milling machine did not like that at all. It was very vocal in not wanting to do that. So eventually, what I ended up doing for part of it is cutting down the one side, then going to the other side, cutting down the other side. And then after a bit of that, I just went down the one side and then moved it back without actually cutting any more, then dug it in a little more to cut a little more. And that way it was only cutting on one of the paths, not on the return paths. After all that, a little bit of cleanup on the belt sander here, just to get it a little nicer to do the blue. And eventually, like that's I think a 60 grit belt on there, and eventually I put a 120 or 150 grit belt on there to sand it down a little more. And after that, took a hand orbital sander and of course this air sander for inside to clean up in there a little bit as well. Um, the only part in there that's really important is the bottom where the tool sits on, and then, of course the top has grub screws going down through it, so the tools don't sit on there. And well, I guess the back's pretty important too. That's got to be pretty straight as well. And so that was pretty much the process for all of them. Now we're getting into the part where we're actually putting the dovetails into these, and two of them I did mess up. They are fixable. I'm just not fixing them right now. They'll just be on like a project down later on in life. But if, like I said, if you go just a little deep on those or just a little wide on those, it just messes everything right up. This was a fun project. I've never done this much milling in on a single project before, and I'm looking forward to more projects like this as well. So once these were all completed, the only other things left to do was make the grub screws and the screw that the adjuster set on, and to do some bench work on cleaning these up. Plus, of course, drill and tap the holes for the grub screws along with the adjuster screw on this thing. And again, when it came time to drill these holes, I would drill the one hole with like an eighth inch bit, then go back and drill it to size, and then put the next piece in and index the next piece the same to do it and do all four like that. Then do the back one on all of them as well. When I did first do all these, I decided to not go too large on them. I was a little concerned about running out of real estate on these parts, and that bit me in the ass. I actually had to go back and re-drill them larger and make larger grub screws for these. All in all, though, the process went good. The second time around, I did not bother putting the countersinks in as I did with the first time, and they still, worked out really well with the oversized grub screws in there. And again, this was from threading it on the first time. I had to go back and drill these back out again, as I said earlier. The process after this was a little bit of bench work with file and sanders, and one thing I'm going to have to do in the future with the bluing solution I have is do a lot more degreasing beforehand. So you'll notice that the part in the vise right now does not look anything like what I've been working on. This is actually the shoe for the tailstock on my lathe. What I've found with the lathe, it has that one bolt going up to the bottom, and the shoe would hold it onto the actual body of the lathe itself. And unfortunately, it would either bind up or it would all of a sudden really loosen off super fast. So I decided to go in and file those down a lot straighter, and then take a 400 grit stone and give them a little bit of polish with some oil, and then flip it over to an 800 grit and give them a little more polish on both the edges. When I did put this back together, it went back together rather nicely, which is not something that normally does, and it worked quite well. As far as new tools, I picked this up too, as my grub screws. When I'm building them, I got to move the tailstock off 1.8 degrees. I decided to pick something up to make sure that it's back to where it was. And if you can see the dial there, it's way off. It's well in need of more adjustment than what I thought. I actually thought it was centered right out. Now you can see on this pass through, when I moved it over, it's coming back really close to true. In fact, I don't think I'll ever need it any closer than that on the work I'm doing. Like I said, for the grub screws, I'm not doing any video on that. I've already done a video where I've made grub screws, and it's the same process. But what I am making here is the kind of washers, the threaded washers that go underneath the nuts that will sit on the post. In fact, if you look at that, you can see the nut on a tool holder there, and that great big washer underneath it is what I'm currently making. Um, I did have some issues with this, so cut it down to size. After it was cut down to size, it was a matter of doing some knurling on it, just just to make it easier to move around when your hands are all greasy. And then it was a matter of just parting them all off after they got drilled and threaded. For that, just use once again my calipers. It wasn't the end of the world if I drilled a little deep into the stock. It's just a matter of cutting the stock off. But I do have to say, after I cut the stock, everything was drilled, and there wasn't much, if any. In fact, I think even with the point on that drill, I don't think there was any indentation on the stock that remained that indicated that it ever had been drilled. Though parting these things off was a challenge. I think what happened was my actual parting blade was on a little bit of an angle because as I started going in deeper, it started to bind more. And I did move it over a few times and try to set it to true zero, but I wasn't apparently all that successful in doing so. The knurling turned out okay. After this, what I ended up doing is just marking it off where I needed to cut it to make the three washers that would go onto the index and post for the tool. And I did get them in. All three of them I got in, maybe halfway to where that piece was drilled out. And well, right now I'm drilling it out, and afterwards I'm going to thread it and then come back. And you can see on the video one of the part lines were already cut. Now I'm working on the second line. That tool did bind up multiple times in there, and I ended up having to take it back and regrind it. And eventually, I just took that bar out and took it to the saw and cut it with the saw. And the saw did a nice fast job on the cut, but not as accurate as I wanted. And the grinding I did on it wasn't as good as I wanted either. So at some point, I will be remaking those three parts with a balloon solution, like I stated earlier. I'm going to have to get something. I did use some acetone on this, but I'm going to have to get something that's really going to take any of the oils off. The actual parts I machined did not. Well, I only did the one, but it did not glue all that well, and I figured no point getting into the other ones until I can get something in there that actually will clean them. And I noticed on the bottle I got it does mention a specific brand to use. And when I'm back in the machine shop, I'm just going to take a bottle up to the counter and say, "Can you sell me a brand, whatever this is on this bottle they say to use? Sell me a bottle of that, and see if that actually works a little better." It did do a really nice job on the grub screws and the index in posts and those washers, but on the actual parts I machined, it didn't work out all the great.